name is Jeppe Hanskap, and I'm the CEO of Innovisor. I've been working with networks and change for, I guess, at least 15 years, but maybe even longer. But what I wanted to talk about today was really what we've been up to in the last, what do you call it? One sec. In the last, can you see my screen now? I hope you can. In the last year here. So Innovisor in many ways, right? We moved back to the home offices right after the pandemic started, and then we've been going a bit back and forth, but we constantly kind of kept a distance to going full time back to the work. So today we are working in a hybrid work model where we have 4 things that we actually go back to the office for. And we go back for social bonding, we go back for employee onboarding, we go back to the office for kicking off new activities, and for complex problem solving. There is a reason why it's those 4 things that we've actually decided to go or to meet in the office for. That it actually makes sense in network terms. And I think I can share some of it with you why it makes sense. What we've also been doing is that we've been making major steps forward on sustainable development goals in this past year. So if you had asked us 2 years ago, we would have had a lot of focus on climate and reducing our CO2 footprint and so forth. We're not having that anymore. And you might ask, so why is that? Has that agenda disappeared for you? And it has not, of course. We just can't find any place where we can do more than what we're already doing. We're already not traveling anymore, so we do not have any CO2 emission. We haven't had, any face-to-face projects requiring travel since 2020, basically. And of course, the pandemic has been driving part of that, but we actually already took the decision in 2019 to go all virtual. We also don't do any prints anymore. We skipped the printer. It was as we made an office move a couple of years ago, we actually decided not to connect the printers to the electricity anymore. And since nobody plugged it on, that kind of became a good sign that we actually could live without a printer. So what we have today is a setup where we are actually not having any impact on the environment, and I think that's a good thing. So what we've done is that we actually decided to move on forward on 2 other places where we can have an impact. So there's something called the Sustainable Core, which is quality education, which we care a lot about. So we are actively involved in mentoring students and lecturing for students, and actually also employing interns and students to make sure that they get the best possible quality out of their education. So that's one thing we're focused on. The other thing we're focused on is the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is about gender equality. In the past year, what we've done is that we have been working a lot on our data to kind of figure out what can we learn from how people across genders connect and collaborate with each other in the workplace. And I have to say, it's pretty disappointing. I think it's disappointing. It's about 10 years ago now that Lean In, the book of Sheryl Sandberg, the Facebook COO, was published. It was really popular. And in that book 10 years ago, we had there was a reference to some of the data from Innovisor, which said that men and women had a bias in how they connected with each other. And we can just tell you that even though it's now 10 years down the road, that bias is still happening in workplaces every single day. But because of that, we introduced a new product called the Inclusion Baseline. We do think it's important for people to understand how they connect to each other. Basically, every single leader needs to understand how their people are connecting to each other and understanding that bias, because if they don't understand that bias, it's going to be making things worse every single time they actually take a decision on how they want to structure their work, or man, or staff their work, or whatever it is. Good. So that's what has been going on in Innovisor. A lot of steps forward on the Sustainable Development Goals. But what about the data? And this is what I wanted to share with you, right? So First of all, you probably heard about the 3%. The 3% rule tells you that 3% of employees shape the perceptions of up to 90% of their colleagues. This is something we discovered a lot of years ago, 13, 14 years ago, and we built an algorithm around identifying those 3% that have that influence. I want to say it's not about finding the people with the most influence in the organization. It's about finding the smallest group of people that collectively can have the biggest impact on the organization. That actually means that the algorithm that we apply to find those 3% needs to get into all the small tribes and groups and cliques that you have around the organization. Like in this picture here, where you got about 600 people spread across 4 countries, connecting to each other in different ways. The influences are marked with red, and they have an influence that they're not deciding on themselves, but everybody else is pointing to them. So we're talking about peer influence that looks like this on 90% of their colleagues. Sometimes I get a question. So what about the leaders? How much do they influence? And leaders typically has or account for about 12% of the employee population. And those 12% impact maybe around 45% of their colleagues. So I think the key message, and that's also the reason why I call it the ultimate non-discovery, is that well, this is still happening. The numbers around 3% rule has not changed during the pandemic. It is still a very limited number of people that impacts the majority of the organization. And I can also say it's still also true that these people are very often unknown to the leaders. Simply, they are not the ones that you think they are. Good. So the 3% rule prevails, but that was not one of the findings I wanted to share with you for 2021. It's not really a finding. It is something that just exists. One of the findings I want to share with you was that what happened in the pandemic was that we all disconnected from each other. We didn't connect to each other as much as we used to. We might have connected to people that we were close to in our teams, but the people that we normally would meet at the water cooler, we are not meeting anymore. And this means that a team like this one, which used to consist of 25 to 30 really well-connected people, they have now split into silos. And what we can see in our data is actually that people are connecting about 30% less with other people than they used to do before. What is the consequence of this, you might ask? Well, there's several consequences. One of them is when your organization or team is splitting into silos, you will have less innovation and you will have worse performance. So that's really a consequence of this. There's also another consequence, and that actually goes on inclusion, because as these linkages and ties between people disappear, it's often those ties that are less strong that disappear, so the weaker ties. And what we can see is that for inclusion, this means that men are maybe not connecting as much to women anymore. Women are not connecting as much to men anymore. Maybe we're not connecting so much to each other anymore if we have different sexual orientations, if we have different genders, different disabilities, different nationalities, and whatever. We connect to the people, basically, that look like ourselves when we look in the mirror. So that has been much more dominant in the last 1.5 years. Major finding, and it has major consequences for organizations today. Second finding. The second finding is that we're actually losing people out of our organization networks. So what we see now is that we have more people that are not pointed to. If we ask people, so who do you go to for help and advice, or who gives you energy in your daily work? It's a bigger number of people that are not being pointed to by others. Just imagine, what is the impact if nobody in your organization points to you or interacts with you, reaches out to you in your daily work life? I mean, how would that feel, right? And what I'm writing here is that the number is now around 15% on average. It used to be 5%. The consequence of this is that people will feel loneliness. So this is what I call workplace loneliness, and I think it's really something we need to be aware of as organizational leaders right now. Actually, there's several things we can do to avoid it. And one of the very simple tricks is, of course, make sure you reach out to all your people, not only once, but several times. Also make sure that you actually pick the right channels. You want to make sure you can pick a channel where you can actually listen to what they're saying, see them into their eyes, understand how they behave, and all of those small signs that we normally don't see if we're just hiding behind it, being in a virtual call. So make sure you connect to people. It is a big recommendation on our side. I can tell you that the health consequence of being lonely is actually almost the same as smoking 15 or 20 cigarettes per day. So you don't want your people to feel lonely, right? I am almost thinking we need to kind of start working on having non-loneliness policies within organizations. So this was another major finding. The third finding that we have had in Innovisor over the last 1 to 1.5 years is that, well, when you get new people on board, then the time it takes to integrate them into the new or into the employee networks, that has doubled. What does that mean? It actually means that when people get into the organization, right, they don't know who to ask for help. And since they're not really sitting in the same room anymore as they used to do, it becomes harder to ask for help. They don't know who to go to, etc. And traditional ways of onboarding people, like just having one big employee onboarding seminar, is not really helping you. What you want to do differently here is that you want to make sure people create the social bonds to each other, to the close team, but actually they also need to connect into what we call the word of mouth. They need to figure out, okay, so who are the experts within different areas that they should connect to when they are in need of their expertises. So the conclusion here again, or the recommendation is, make sure people know who it is that are really the experts in the word of mouth. Who is it that people will go to when they, or should go to when they have different needs for capabilities? You can easily find those people, but of course you need to ask, who is it that you go to in the organization? Make sure you integrate, or what do you call it, connect those new employees into those people, because that's where it happens. And I can tell you, if you don't do it, well, it doesn't happen. People are not building connections to each other just because it's a good idea. You need to discipline it. You need to facilitate it, and you need to make sure people understand the reason why they should connect to each other. And you should not expect your more tenured employees that they will connect with your newcomers, because I mean they have already maxed out on the bandwidth they have in their brain for building connections. They got the connections they need to, right? So why should they connect to these new employees? You need to build the case for that. But it's actually important. If you do that, you can dramatically accelerate onboarding in ways that you cannot even imagine. And if you want to know more about that, I know we have several about that on our business case on how you can build the business case for that. So that was 3 discoveries that we've had during the last year here. And the 3 discoveries that I wanted to share with you. So now we're going to the next part of the session here, where you're allowed to ask questions in the chat, or you can just go live almost and ask a question. Yes, 2 questions. Can I read them in the chat? Okay, let me see. Where is the chat? Can someone read up the chat for me, because I can't find it right now?
Yeah, let me read out loud the question that Nes had, specifically to discovery number 3. Do you have like data comparing places that have communities of practice and those that don't? So I think what Nes tries to get to is, are communities of practice helping people to be onboarded faster in an organization than without communities of practice?
I think it is. It's at least a help. But I can tell you what we've seen in some cases is that even though you have communities of practice, that's not where people go. So very often, actually, we have shadow organizations. So in some cases, we've been working with companies where they were establishing communities of practices and they kind of staffed them from the headquarters. But I mean, people were already working with this. So they already had the experts in the informal networks in the shadow organization, right? So even though we got a center of excellence established over here at headquarters, right? People went a different way because they already knew who they considered as the expert, who they perceived as the expert. So those were the people they actually talked to. But I think one of the key things to understand before you actually establish a center of excellence, and even if you have established a center of excellence, is okay. So you have a shadow organization. If you have a shadow organization, you need to make sure that you kind of integrate those. I think we have a case on the website, or maybe not, but where we worked with a procurement organization, and they were so happy that they had been kind of minimizing the number of requests they were getting from the organization, because they thought, okay, now we build their expertise. They're really doing well, right? But what happened in reality was that the shadow organization was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because people thought it was too complex really to get support from the So, I mean, it can be a good thing if it works. I just want to say that it really depends on how you actually build the center of excellence at the initial phase, if it is enough or not.
Okay, thank you. Then I also had another question about the 30% drop in collaboration. So do you have you seen in companies in the last year how they use technologies to strengthen or enable that collaboration? Because now that they can't meet each other in the offices, do we see a bigger uptake into technologies? And if so, what is the effect of it?
I mean, no doubt we've all been moving on to platforms like Teams and Zoom and so forth. I mean, I think it was Microsoft who actually revealed some research on what effect it had on Microsoft. And on Microsoft, it had the effect that people were not collaborating as much anymore as they used to. One of the effects is that you feel like you have to, I mean, if it's on Teams, for example, you feel like, okay, I need to book a meeting with that person before I really talk to them. It feels intrusive to book a meeting. So if I want to talk to one of my colleagues, I need to book a 15-minute meeting, right? And especially if you have now I'm thinking about the newcomers here, right? The newcomers, they have a hard time doing that. I mean, technologies help, and I know a lot of companies are talking about how they can become 100% remote, but I really think it cannot do the entire trick for your social bonding and performance, by the way.
Good, thank you. I think Nat is just sharing an idea of using Miro as a way to collaborate on a whiteboard as a technology.
Yeah, I can tell you we have been involved with several projects where we've been using Miro as a whiteboard tool, and also with the liberating structures and what have we, right? And I must admit, we have seen good results and we also seen bad results. So again, I think it's about the people. It's about how you facilitate the process and the people you get into it more than the tool. That is really what drives this thing.
Good. Can I ask you one question?
Yes, of course.
Maybe one final question. Maybe like more a outward-looking question about 2022. So of course nobody knows what will happen in the next year, but it doesn't look it's getting better from last year. So what is really the key thing that a leader should focus on for the next year?
I think for me, the key thing a leader should understand is that the leader is dealing with people, and people, when they make sense of things, if they decide to stay with the company or if they decide to move on, they actually make sense by talking to peers that they trust, peers they like, peers they sympathize with, peers they feel like are competent, and if a leader can understand that and connect to that wisdom amongst their employees, right, then I think that is a key thing. But I do think that leaders in the coming year should connect to those employees, because if they don't, they might leave. I mean, we all know that we have this thing called the Great Resignation in the horizon somewhere, right? Where 40 to 50% of people are apparently considering leaving organizations. And if you don't understand that you actually need to make sure that your people understand what you're trying to do as an organization, and they feel that it's engaging and that you are concerned about their well-being, then I actually think you will be pretty bad off. I think the winning organizations make sure to connect leaders to the front line, to the people that have the influence, and make sure that they actually are in the know and know what is going on in the organization.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't have any more questions for now.
Wonderful. But in that case, I want to say thank you to the people who attended, and I want to say happy holidays. What we're doing here today is that we are going to give out Christmas gifts, and actually I have made something called homemade æbleskiver. But it's not called homemade. It is æbleskiver, which is a traditional thing in Denmark, and I'm going to look forward to be eating that with together with my colleagues. It was great having you on board. Thank you, and talk to you later.